Round 2 in the AFL over the Easter weekend. Tonight we'll be focusing on the big news of the week. Gary Ablett will be making his 13th trip to the tribunal tomorrow night. We'll be looking at his situation. Footscray joined Melbourne as a club in crisis. Peter Gordon, the president, will be with us shortly to talk about the Bulldogs' current plight. Peter Dacos will be along again with his sharpshooters segment. Doug Wade will be dropping by to relive his wonderful goal-kicking career, and the chief football writer of the Sunday Age, Rowan Conley, will bring us up to date with all the latest news from the AFL scene. But before we get on to any of that, it's a pleasure, as usual, to welcome my co-host, Lee Matthews. Lee, a peaceful Easter weekend for you?
I was at the MCG the whole weekend. I spent my Easter at the MCG, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and I went Saturday for Channel 7, I went Sunday for the paper, and yesterday for myself. And
you're not a coach now, and perhaps it is more peaceful not being a coach. How would you have liked to have woken up and read that your general manager didn't like your game plan?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting one, wasn't it? I mean, that's one of the disadvantages of Hassaman being a champion ex-player. He has football opinions, and I suppose he has some credibility with them too. But in general, I think any coach would like his sort of administration not to be talking about the specific match things.
Rowan Conley, chief football writer for the Sunday Age, joins us this week, and your publication was in graphic form, Rowan.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fairly juicy sort of incident to cover from a pictorial sense, I suppose. But look, we copped a little bit of flack about it too, but it just gets back to the age-old thing about, you know, what should we and shouldn't we publish? And it was such a talking point all weekend, I think. And in actual fact, I think our particular photo was probably less graphic than the one that our opposition displayed.
What about the words, Christian encounters God?
Well, it's Easterly. I mean...
does that make it good or bad?
Well, I don't think that was there was no sort of judgment inherent in that headline. I think it was just a clever play on words, and I don't think it was necessarily being too flippant about it.
Didn't have any problem with it, Lee?
Oh, no, I thought it was a little bit unsavoury. I thought it was a bit tacky myself. I thought that was more tacky than the blood myself. The blood didn't concern me, but I thought that was anyway. I mean, it's only a little point, really. But
from the way it might be construed by devout Christians, or the tired God joke with Gary Ablett. I know I've heard Father Brosnan talk about that, and he said about 3 years ago, and I couldn't help agreeing, he's sick to death of it.
Yeah, well, I can imagine he would be, because it can be a sensitive subject. It certainly would be with Gary, who has got some strong beliefs, apparently.
Well, Gary Ablett's situation was confirmed today that he will face the tribunal, his 13th visit, and this one looks potentially very serious. There's the record going way back to 1984. A couple of threes in there, a 2, a 1, a couple of reprimands, and that's in the first 5 or 6 years of his career. And into the 90s, a few more 2s and a few acquittals, and of course a history of going along and telling the truth at the tribunal. Rowan, I don't suppose we can be too judgmental. We're discouraged from doing that sort of thing, but what do you make of it?
Well, 50-50 job as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you've got to allow that split second in which this all happens. We can't read his intent, really. I think there's more argument that this one was an instinctive situation than some of the other charging offences which he's been involved in over the years. And look, even looking at it after looking at it several times on the video, you know, I still have that doubt in my mind. I guess a lot of people would be the same.
Sometimes I wonder whether Gary's still playing 90s football according to the 70s and 80s regulations and rules.
And Neil Busy doesn't like careless arms, even though they might be instinctively.
Well, it's a natural reaction that when you know there's contact coming to sort of raise your arm to protect yourself, particularly if it's instinctive. The tribunal, I suppose, have made it fairly clear that you're not allowed to do it. It might be a natural reaction, but it's not something that they're going to allow.
I felt that one of the most significant things out of the whole episode on Saturday was we had a very interesting press conference with Gary Ayres, as people will see later on, and I asked a question about the incident, and his view was, why are you blokes going to make something of it? Now, I think it was significant that a coach didn't appear to know what the procedure is now, and that is, of course, that the umpires view the video immediately after the game. And the decision was effectively made on Saturday night. So the trial by media argument and the influence of the media in publishing those sort of pictures, it just doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, we learned today, Ian Collins told us today, that in future the way the system will work is that the announcement will be made on the same night as the game. So you're not going to have this 2 or 3 day interlude when there's endless speculation, and it really builds up the hype a lot more.
I can't help thinking about the Lockett Caven incident of a couple of years ago, which cost Tony Lockett 7 weeks. And I felt that was an instinctive arm at a moment where there was a head-on collision coming up as Caven ran with the flight of the ball. Lockett was on a long lead. Now, who's the more culpable, I wonder? A person who raises his arm to protect himself there, or someone wanting to shrug a tackler?
Well, I suppose the difference there was on Saturday that Gary actually had the ball in his arms when the contact was made, whereas the Lockett thing, I mean, the ball was in between the two players. But I think there's a fair difference between the two situations, in my opinion. I mean, Saturday's, I would have thought, is a less serious type of thing than happened with the Lockett-Caven thing.
Well, we'll find out tomorrow night what Neil Busy makes of it and how he compares or contrasts it with Tony Lockett of a couple of seasons ago. Some are calling it something of a fizzer of a start to the season, and there certainly have been more than a fair share of shellackings over the first 2 rounds. 16 games played thus far, and 5 outcomes of 87 points or more. Footscray and Melbourne twice, and Sydney over at Football Park in round 1. Rowan.
Well, there's 2 arguments about this, isn't there? I mean, is it a trend or is it something that's long been happening? I mean, I go back to St Kilda in 1985. They lost their first 3 games of the season by more than 100 points. That was in the middle of a run of 4 consecutive wooden spoons, it should be said. But I'm not sure we should be jumping to too many early conclusions. I actually think the competition overall is probably a lot more even than it was back in the mid-80s. And I think we let's have a look at a few rounds first. But look, it's not the blockbuster start the league would have wanted. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the closest margin's been something like 16 points, and even a couple of those reasonably close games have probably been effectively decided well before the final siren.
Well, Footscray and Melbourne, the common factors in that graphic that we saw, Lee, horror starts. Crisis time for them?
Yeah, well, I've seen the 3 games that are the greatest winning margins or losing margins, whichever seat you're sitting in. But, well, I mean, obviously Footscray and Melbourne, bad losses in the first 2 games. It's obviously a very crisis might be the word. I think the difference in football in the 90s is it's a couple of bad losses, but it's the survival problem for clubs that are facing in football in the 90s, and it's a couple of bad losses on the fields and the ramifications they're going to have there that I think brings the crisis talk coming.
Well, Footscray President Peter Gordon is no stranger to tough times. He's fought for his club's survival. He's taken on the AFL over some of the biggest issues confronting the game. He yesterday found himself pulling his club together after a second straight thrashing plunged Footscray's season into early despair.
Gives it away towards Hart. He sets sail for home, and there's another one.
It's round 1, 1996. All the new hopes, fresh ideas and shared dreams at Whitten Oval are dented after Brisbane mauls Footscray. It's bad, but it's no disaster. A week later, and the worst hammering imaginable. The storm clouds which had been brewing the previous week are now threatening to swamp Footscray. A spiritless performance has left the Bulldogs in tatters. It's the club's 4th thumping in a row. Beaten by St Kilda in the final round of last year, they were humiliated the following week by Geelong in the 3rd elimination final. 4 losses by a combined total of 354 points.
This would have been the toughest night that Alan Joyce has ever experienced.
Having replaced Terry Wheeler in similar circumstances in 1994, coach Alan Joyce, clearly rattled by the defeat, refused to speak to the players after the game. Instead, he opted for an impromptu 50-minute meeting with members of the board and match committee. What was said remains confidential, but many words have been spoken since the loss. Many views have been expressed. These are dark days for the proud Scrays.
Well, some graphic pictures there, and that paints a graphic picture too. Footscray has won 1 of its last 10 at the MCG. The last 5 have ranged from 34 low, then up to 79 and a high of 131. It doesn't read terribly well. 5-7-37, its lowest ever score against North Melbourne. Well, the Bulldogs have made a decision under Peter Gordon's presidency to make a piecemeal move towards the MCG. Are you at all concerned about having done that, given that outlook, Pete?
Oh no, not at all, Tim. I think that you say it's a piecemeal move, but we have consistently sought to play big games at the MCG throughout the 90s. We've, as Lee would recall, relocated Collingwood games there and Carlton games, and won some memorable games there. And for us, I think if we've enjoyed very little success in some of those games of recent times, the answer is not to seek to avoid the ground where the finals is played, but to learn to play better there.
Just on that issue before more recent events, to some extent though, you're giving up that constituency that you've worked so hard to cultivate to go to a ground where you haven't been performing well?
I don't agree with that. I mean, the Western Suburbs is our constituency. We are the team for the Western Suburbs of Melbourne, and we market ourselves that way, and we seek to develop the game there, and that's the area of Melbourne and Victoria that we seek to represent. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek to play games which we think can draw 60, 70,000 people at the home of football. Our supporters like the MCG, they like going there. We can't fit those sort of people into the Whitten Oval, and were we to play all of our games at the Whitten Oval these days, the sort of financial deficit that we suffer, comparable to say in North Melbourne, runs into many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we can't afford to forego that revenue.
I've seen your membership quoted at 5,000 in the last couple of days. In fact, those figures indicate that it's halved between 95 and 96.
Oh, but bear in mind we haven't played a home game yet, and traditionally the real time that we make up our membership is the first and second home games of the season. That's when people come along to watch the team for the first time, and
won't be easy with form like the first 2 weeks.
Well, that's exactly what the concern that Dennis Gallenberdy and I have been expressing over the last few days. We're very much on show. Our first game against Brisbane, watched by a national audience, and then the game at the MCG against North Melbourne. It's certainly a difficult product to be marketing.
What happened in the hour or two after the game and later on Saturday night?
Well, as your introduction said, a lot of it will remain confidential, but as soon as the team and the coaching panel came in, and some board members were there, Gary O'Sullivan told us that Alan would like to meet us and talk with us. He was clearly very concerned with what had gone on. He's a very proud man, and in his long and very proud history, I'm sure he's never suffered a defeat like that before. And following on from the last game against Brisbane, he was very concerned about it and expressed those concerns to us, and we discussed it at some length. I'm obviously not going to go into that discussion, but the next morning he gave me a call again and said that he'd like to meet the board again, and we then met at my home for 3 or 4 hours on the Sunday afternoon. And I think, as someone in the Age reported today, the philosophy that we've sought to develop following on from last year is not to look for recriminations or scapegoats, but to seek to face what is a real problem for the club together, and that's why we convened yesterday with the board and the match committee and the players' executive, who are, I guess, the 3 leadership groups of the club, to really have an honest and frank look at ourselves, and it was a pretty constructive meeting, I think, and some honest views were exchanged, and I hope we can go forward from here.
Did you find, Peter, in that hour after the game when the depression and the emotions are sort of at their lowest, I mean, was there, did Alan Joyce, for instance, offer to resign if that was going to help the cause, for instance, as a token gesture?
Well, I'm not going to go into what Alan may or may not have done, Lee. I have told you that he asked to see us, and but I guess what I can say is that the view was expressed pretty commonly that in the emotion and the emotionally drained atmosphere of something like that, that's not the time to be making sensible decisions, and there's very much a view that we ought to just take the night and convene, the next day and have a long, hard look at things at that point, and that's what we did.
Yeah.
Do you find, Peter, that you have to involve yourself more in the day-to-day operations of the football side of the club than would, say, a David Shaw at Essendon or a John Elliott at Carlton?
No, look, I really don't think so, Rowan. I think that what the journalists and the public get to see of what boards and presidents do is very much dictated by what happens on the field. It's like Tim introduces me as a long-term critic of the AFL. I often say complimentary things about the AFL, but no one ever reports them.
I think on balance, though, it's a fair comment.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. But in a similar way, most of the work that presidents and boards do have nothing to do with the on-field operations of a footy team. It's a lot to do with raising funds, management issues, property issues, and these days increasingly gaming issues, and very little to do with what happens on the field. But we talked a minute ago about the membership figures for this year, and when you see your team lose by a total of 37, 38 goals in the first 2 games, and you know that the absolute success or failure of your membership drive is going to be determined by what that floating 4,000 or 5,000 who aren't so committed to buy come what may, but will do it if they think the club's going to have a reasonable year. Well, obviously it's a cause for serious concern. But I hasten to make the point, it was not the board that initiated an involvement this weekend. Both on the Saturday night after the game and on the Sunday, it was Alan saying that he'd like to meet and talk with us.
Seeking reassurance?
You know, I guess you've got 1,000,001 ways to ask me what went on, and I've got 1,000,001 ways of telling you that I'm not going to go into that. Alan's asked that not occur, and you know, I'm obviously going to honour that. He's a very proud man, Alan Joyce. I don't think in his long and distinguished career he would have suffered a defeat like that, and certainly not 2 in a row like that. He was obviously very concerned. We, as a board, and I as a president, expressed support for him, as I've done consistently and as we've done consistently, and I'm sure that he's had confidence that support's always been there.
Is the modern football environment such that a couple of losses that bad can really endanger the future of a whole club?
Oh, well, it depends when they come. You know, clearly, if something happens in the middle of the season like that, then if the club's got an opportunity to correct it, and particularly if you finish in the finals, people tend to forget the whole thing. But there are critical points that come along. We unfortunately have suffered 2 in a row. We had a humiliating defeat against Geelong in the finals, which is one of the worst performances by a Footscray side I've ever seen. I think that flattened us a bit, but on the other hand, I think that the club was buoyed a little bit by the recruiting of Jakovic and the revamping of the football division that took place over the summer. Then we're confronted with 2 games like Brisbane and North Melbourne, and that's, as I say, at the time, if you divide your membership into, you know, those who are going to buy come what may, because you cut them and they bleed red, white and blue, you know, you're always going to get those people, I think. But success or failure for a footy club these days depends on the next group of people, the people who can perhaps think of better things to do if Footscray aren't winning more games than they're losing.
Peter, you described Alan Joyce as a very proud man. Let's see how this proud man, 2-time premiership coach at Hawthorn, responded to this devastating 131-point defeat. Footscray's second straight hiding at the start of this season after the match, when eventually he held his post-match press conference.
It must just be terribly disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
The worst performance in your time as coach here, Alan?
At Footscray? Yeah, we've had 4 in the trot now. We had St Kilda last year, we had Geelong the last game in the final, and then we've had 2 in a row this year. So it's been 4.
Crisis meeting time here.
Oh, yeah, we're just talking about some things here with the club. Sure.
How much of a crisis is it?
Oh, I think it's you know, I think it's a major thing. I think the Footscray Football Club, you know, I'm talking the club, is a jeopardy with our performances. Let's be quite honest about it. The performance of the team, you know, reflects into the club and reflects into the future of the Footscray. And you know, I see that as the major crisis that we're facing at the moment. Like, you know, you're talking about attracting people and, you know, members and support, and that's the sort of thing that just detracts from that totally.
What about your own position, Paul? Do you have to continue
your solution? Fun? Me? I'm just very disappointed for the football club. You know, you know, the board have been, you know, terrific with me and, you know, supported me, you know, 100%. There's no problem there with the board, Peter and everybody. But, you know, I suppose under the circumstances, everyone's got to look at their own individual performance.
You haven't even addressed the players tonight. Obviously, this was more important.
Do you have any explanation for what the problem has been in these last 4 matches?
If someone could tell me, it would help me dramatically.
Did you think that they lacked spirit in the first quarter and the first half?
Yeah, lacked everything, Jeff.
But particularly that.
Like, you know, I suppose you know, when you set up and you know, I suppose these 3 people behind you there, the match committee, we've probably spent, I don't know, would have spent 15 hours this week trying to set it up and get it right. You know, and we had a meeting yesterday with the players at 5 o'clock yesterday to go through a plan for today's game, and we thought we had just about done it to the nth degree. And we just polished it up before the game today, and that was the result.
Next week's Fitzroy, who are obviously a very lowly club, if you can put it that way. How vital has that suddenly become just to get 4 points?
Probably a lot higher than us at the moment, to put it that way.
It's the first time you haven't spoken to the players after a game, Al?
Yeah, it is, Pete. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Did you just feel you couldn't, or are you just that disappointed?
Oh, we're just having a meeting here, and I just think need some space and time before we address the things from there.
Individuals play for this? Will individuals play for this in terms of selection?
I'm not talking about anything like that at this stage.
You're happy to continue as coach?
I'm not making any comment about anything, mate, on that side of it at all. It's, we've got a role and responsibility here for the Footscray Footy Club. That's the prime objective while we're all here, and it's just vital that we address that major problem of support and where the club is going. The club have gone out this year and spent probably $750,000 to help the football side get to the next level, with Terry and Brian over there and equipment and all the other things, and that sort of expenditure really has got to be justified by performance on the track and or on the ground, and obviously in the last 2 weeks it's been far from it.
And that expenditure being on players, equipment,
well, it's
promotion?
Terry and Brian full time to help me, and equipment and all the other things that go with it. So it's been a massive investment by the club to really push to the next professional level. And we're seeing, we saw a situation which, today.
So what's your first priority now as far as trying to turn this around?
Don't know yet. We'll think about it overnight.
Well, when we began planning this program, we thought the coaches' press conferences would provide some very interesting television. It took us 2 weeks to come up with a very tense one. Lee, did you ever face one quite like that?
I feel a little sick in the stomach just from actually watching that, because I feel like I've been there. And
so do I. It's not easy being a media person asking the questions.
When you've had a bad loss and you're defending the indefendable, and you bear ultimate responsibility for the team effort, which a coach does. No single player does, but the coach does, and it's a really emotional time.
Back to Peter Gordon, the Footscray president. You described in general terms what's happened between Saturday night and now. It's the second time you've had to go down this road inside, what, 8 or 9 months? There was also a powwow with the coach and the players in the middle stages of last season.
Yeah, there was. We met with I in fact by myself met with the match committee and the players executive after the Adelaide game last year, which was, although not the same on the scoreboard, a pretty lacklustre performance, and meeting seemed to have some positive results. We played Collingwood the next week, in fact, and we're very unlucky just to draw the game.
Wasn't there also a truth session with Alan Joyce? I recall you coming on ABC radio and telling us about a meeting, and everybody's opinion of the coach had gone up because of it, because of his openness and honesty.
Well, he's a pretty honest sort of a bloke, but I think it's wrong to focus on just the one individual. I mean, it's a team approach that these things require, and Footscray's got a young side in many ways, got a lot of young players, and it was a meeting, a bit like the meeting that we had yesterday, I guess, in that some pretty frank views were exchanged. You need to have an atmosphere of trust for those things to take place, and we sort of all committed to each other in yesterday's meeting that no heads were going to roll. It was a matter of supporting each other in our roles, but at the same time being prepared to say some hard things. And hopefully we'll get the same benefit, because we really did look up from that meeting last year.
And Peter, on the positive note of looking forward, what initiatives have sort of come out of the soul search over the weekend to head forward?
Well, a lot of things, Lee, to do with confidence and helping each other to build confidence. A lot of things that related to training. I mean, we've taken a lot on this year. We've got Terry Wallace and Brian Royal there full time. I mean, in a sense, we've sort of trebled the coaching capacities that are there. Maybe, to some extent, it's a matter of harnessing those things and making them work better, so that they're more streamlined and players understand the expectations a bit better. I think some of the training regimens will change as a result of yesterday's meeting. I think the way that we talk and the way that we've agreed that we'll get closer together and try and communicate better at all levels, I think that'll change. And Tim introduced it. We're a pretty tough club at Footscray. We've known hard times. This is another set of hard times for us, and we want to work through them together. Just
on that investment, Peter, I mean, $750,000 is an enormous investment in anyone's language in the football side of the club, particularly given Footscray's financial standing as opposed to some of the power clubs in Melbourne. How big a risk was that for the club?
Well, it's a calculated risk, Rowan, in the sense that for all Melbourne clubs these days who are in a very much a sink or swim situation, with the AFL Commission wanting the less clubs in Melbourne, It's very much a matter of trying to strike a balance. I mean, you have to remain solvent, because if you don't remain solvent, you're out anyway. But on the other hand, you need to invest a sufficient amount of money to remain competitive. And some clubs, and I guess they've been pretty obvious over the last few years, have been prepared to sacrifice on-field competitiveness just to make sure that they made a profit by not spending up to the salary cap, by not spending enough on support services. We're in a bit of a diminishing trend at the moment in the sense that we really believe we need to be exciting on the field, competitive, winning more games in order to build the membership base to where it needs to be, to get a large number of people coming to the games. Now, they're not going to come if we don't put on a good product, and we're not going to put on a good product unless we invest in it. So I guess we've been a bit adventurous this year, but in a sense, if we don't swim, we're going to sink. And in order to swim, we need to put a good team on the field. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, Alan Jakovic surely would be one of the first instances of a guy being recruited specifically because of his marketing ability rather than his football ability, and it doesn't appear to have worked so far.
Well, you know, pretty unfortunate.
Call.
Let me say two things about that. One is we certainly wouldn't have recruited him unless we had a fair opinion of his football ability. But you know, it's been pretty tough for us that Jacko was suspended in the second round, and you know, he feels as bad about that as we do. We're certainly looking forward to him coming back. We're certainly also looking forward to getting Leon Cameron and Stephen Crediuk and some of these other guys back on the track as well. Danny Southern was at our meeting yesterday with a lot to say, and obviously just screaming to get back into the action.
How do you feel about being likened to Paul Cronin? Recruiting a full forward for star quality. And finally, in this inquisition, in late 89, you stood on the Western Oval and called Terry Wheeler to join you on a platform, and you appointed him coach of Footscray, and last weekend he called for your head as president. Do you plan to continue?
Yeah, I do plan to continue. I think that Terry Wheeler's comments need to be understood in the context of the man who made them and what happened to him.
Long haul stuff for you?
Well, it's been a long haul. You know, this is now my 7th season doing it, but it's been enormously rewarding. You know, I took over a club that was in liquidation, had a membership of less than 4,000. And since that time, it's become quite a strong club in many ways. It's had a terrific win-loss ratio. It's been in the finals a whole lot more than it had ever been before in the last 30 years. And, you know, although we've got tough times at the moment, you know, I'm still optimistic about our future.
Well, we might talk about the positives, which sadly aren't connected to Footscray from last weekend, and we were just having a look at North Melbourne in action there. Corey McKernan, Lee, looks as though he could be one of the stars of this season. Thrown into the ruck in that final they won against the Eagles last year, and really that looks as though it might have been the making of him.
Well, I think he's basically a type of size player who can play in the ruck, and there's the leaping, jumping ruckman, but he's also good enough to be playing as a key forward, and it's that flexibility that's causing so many problems for oppositions, because the old days of the ruckman doing the centre bounce and dropping back in defence, McKernan's always pushing in towards the half-forward line, so the opposition have to decide what they're going to do about it. Justin Madden possibly outsmarted him along with the help of Koutafidis in the Carlton defence in the final last year, as we can recall. But it's very hard when a ruckman pushes forward who can mark the ball as well as McKernan. And sometimes Scott Wind had to play centre-half back, and that didn't suit him. Sometimes Barry Stanfield, who was centre-half back, tried to pick him up, and neither of them were able to cope. So he's an exceptionally exciting player who's going to be really tough for any opposition to stop. And
there's Craig Scholl, who has been a defender, pretty useful one, although I think regarded as something of a confidence player, very good when he's rolling and not so good when he's not, but he's been swung into attack with Longmire gone for the season and so on, and it's worked well.
Well, he's done it for a couple of games. Often you'll find defenders will go into the forward line and kick goals for a week or two. Whether they can do it, you know, month after month remains to be seen, but he certainly, I thought he was best player on the ground on Saturday. He was really impressive, and he's pretty good against St Kilda the week before, I'm told.
Well, not all press conferences are trials by media and 1,000 daggers and all of that sort of thing, and for Dennis Pagan, the last two have been pretty comfortable. Let's catch up with the North Melbourne coach after their 22-goal thumping of Footscray.
Obviously a lot easier than you expected it was going to be.
Well, we really thought Footscray were really going to come out and really serve it up to us, and gee, our blokes were really primed for it and got off to a good start, and we're just so pleased the way it turned out in the finish.
It must be encouraging you can win by such a margin when you've got Longmire, Schwass, Groom, you know, all out of the side.
We really didn't go out there. We just went out to get the 4 points, and it just turned out that way. I think our blokes had everything run from today. I thought our in-close work was very good, and I thought our defensive pursuit skills in terms of tackling, chasing, spoiling, shepherding, smothering were all first class.
Sort of wins show that your depth is getting up to the standard that you need.
It's probably a bit early to talk about that at this stage. We're just happy to have a good game, and then you know, I reckon you've got to probably wait 6 or 7 weeks before we get a line through the form and see where we're at then.
Ross Smith's form in the reserves, did he play, and did he play well?
Look, he was terrific, Ross, and he really has got respect on his own terms. Just the way he handled it, he was first in the team meeting Thursday night, and you see how some guys handle disappointment. Ross Smith, a real man, just came in there, sat in the same spot he sat in, contributed, and made her a part of the meeting, made it work for us, and he played in the seconds today. He gashed his knee and came off probably just before halfway through the second quarter. I don't know whether he came back on after half-time or not. But he was straight in here after the game, and he really typifies the North Melbourne spirit. I said to David King after the game, I said, don't think you can sit down and relax now, because I know Ross Smith's going to be out there and trying hard as he possibly can to take the spot back off you.
Nice job being a coach, very easy, very relaxed, depending, of course, upon the scoreboard. Well, Peter Gordon, do you derive any inspiration from North Melbourne? Because but for the grace of God go they when they look at Footscray, perhaps. They were very close to the edge a few years ago, and at the moment they're cooking with gas.
Oh, but you know, in terms of their finances and their position, I think they're probably quite a comparable club. And indeed on field, if you took a line through their last 5 years, their win-loss ratio over the last 5 years is no better than Footscray's. They've certainly given us a fair thumping on the weekend, and I think over the last few games we've played, you know, I think they're one of the teams that we struggle to match up well against, and it's clearly an issue we need to address. But you look at issues like membership, sponsorship, total turnover, we're comparable clubs.
I think, Peter, North's membership has really almost quadrupled over about the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, they're a club that has definitely got the off-field structure set before it worried about the team. They established Friday night as a niche market at the MCG. Perhaps, is that an example Footscray could look at in getting all those sort of things right before addressing the team situation?
I think certainly the opportunity to play those sort of cameo games at the MCG in front of big crowds, and certainly on a Friday night, has been a big winner for them. We'd certainly like to have that with our big games, and Wayne Carey at centre half forward wouldn't go astray either, I guess.
Do you think you've got a player that you could market around like North can with Carey?
I think we've got, I think Footscray's best half-dozen players are generally underestimated by the competition. I think that, you know, people like Chris Grant and Leon Cameron would be terrific players in any side. And I think we're still waiting to discover, or working to discover, I should say, the secret to unleash the real potential that the best players that we've got. And
can you confirm why Kim Costa's back in at Adelaide with the Crows and not at Footscray?
Well, because his contract ran out, and he was determined to return to the town that he grew up in. His fiancée was also an Adelaide girl and very keen to return there, and we made a lot of efforts to keep Kim. We don't think it was a money matter, because he is certainly a kid whose attitude at the ball is something that we need a lot more of. Yep. So we made a decision late in the piece when we realised that no amount of money was going to keep him, to try and get the best deal we could, and the result of that was we were able to get Jakovic.
Peter, thanks for joining us, and good luck. I hope better times are ahead, because I think everybody agrees that the western suburbs are too vast not to be well represented in the Australian Football League. So I hope Footscray turn the corner soon. And Rowan Connolly from the Sunday Age, thanks for being with us in Football Feedback this week.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.